The children were already asleep in their rooms at the other end of the corridor. Matt and Lynn were sitting side by side in bed with pillows propped up. He was reading a book about the Civil War. She was editing a marketing report. With a soft sigh, Matt closed the book and rolled over on his side to look at his wife. "Lenny?" "MMM," she replied without looking up. Matt waited, and after a moment she turned to look at him. "Do you love him?" Lynn froze and turned slightly pale. She stared at him in silence, just couldn't bring herself to play this game. Ask who? Or try to lie. Matt deserved more. "No," she said. "So it's just about making love?" "Matt, she began, trying to hold his gaze. Then she looked down at the papers on her lap. "I see," he said. Silence. "I think I'd like you to sleep in the guest room," he said, his voice remaining calm and quiet. She nodded and got out of bed, slipping her feet into her slippers. She reached for the robe on the chair. "Unless, of course, you made love to him in this bed. If you did that, then I'll never sleep in it again." "No," she said, "I didn't do that." She wanted to say, "How could you think that I could do such a thing?" But that would be ridiculous, given the circumstances. Without saying another word, Matt turned off the light on the bedside table and lowered his head onto the pillow, turning his back to her. Lynn stared at him for a minute, her face tense with pain. Then she quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. Friday evening. When Matt returned home, the house was full of delicious smells. He hung up his coat, and Lynn came out of the kitchen to greet him with a smile, although she did not dare to come close. She was wearing one of her beautiful aprons, which she wore when guests came. "Beth and Jason are having dinner at the Frankels. I decided to cook us something delicious today," she said, trying to keep a smile on her face. Matt looked into the dining room. The table was covered with a tablecloth. Their good china and two of the best wine glasses were on it. There were candles and cloth napkins and silver rings. Matt nodded. "It smells good. I'm going to wash my hands and come down in a few minutes." When he returned, Lynn was just bringing in food from the kitchen. She served each of them a portion of fried chicken, as well as potatoes and string beans. On one side, there was a salad with orange slices in a beautiful bowl. They sat down, and Lynn beamed at her husband, although there was tension on her face. "It looks very nice," Matt said. Lynn exclaimed almost involuntarily. Her eyes were wide with shock and horror. Matt zipped up and got off the chair. He looked at Lynn intently. "I thought you'd want to know what it's like when someone urinates on something you care about, something you've invested a lot of time, love, and effort into. I thought it might be a learning experience." Lynn didn't say anything, just looked at her husband, tears streaming down her cheeks. Matt went to the closet, took out his coat, and left the house. Sunday afternoon. "I asked for a transfer," she said. "Oh? I'm being transferred to the internal marketing department in a week. I wanted it to happen as soon as possible. I'll be in the building on Union Street, away from where I am now." "And why did you ask for a transfer?" "I thought you liked the international department. Because I won't be around, next to Douglas. I won't be in the same office anymore." He stopped raking leaves and turned to look at her standing next to him in her colorful autumn sweater. "And why should it matter to me?" She looked both annoyed and offended. "Because I'm not going to date him, that's all. I wanted you to know that." She turned back to the rake. "Lynn, you already told me it was over." "Of course, I take your word for it and trust you completely. Can you think of at least one reason why not?" She stamped her foot lightly and said, "Damn it, Matt. Do you really think your sarcasm will help? Do you really think that moving out of this office will make everything better? As if there are no motels, and lunch hours, and breakfast meetings? Or meetings with clients outside the office. Like there aren't a lot of other men there?" Matt's voice rose to an angry pitch, but he continued to rake the leaves into neat piles without looking at her. "Matt," she said in a thin, sad voice, "what else can I do? I'm trying to do my best, all the ways that I know." She started crying. "To show you how sorry I am, to make it up to you in some way." He turned back to her. "And you think there's some way to make amends? Some kind of magic formula, just the right words, actions, or gestures. And will it all end? Understand, Lynn, you're living in a fucking dream world." He turned away again, returning to his rake. Monday evening. Lynn heard footsteps in the hallway, and then Beth's head appeared in the doorway, sleepy and confused. "Mommy, is that why you slept in the guest room?" Although she was almost 6 years old, she still spoke with a slight gasp, especially when washing her face. "I stayed up late at work, honey, and I'm here so I don't bother Dad. Did you have a bad dream?" Beth nodded solemnly, and Lynn jumped off the bed to hug her. "Lie down with me, Bethy. You and the big bear." She put her daughter and the bear with her under the blanket and lay down next to her. 5 minutes later, Beth was fast asleep again, and Lynn carefully picked her and the bear in her arms and carried them to Beth's room. On the way to the guest bedroom, she suddenly changed her mind and headed to the master bedroom. The door was ajar a few centimeters, and the room was dark. Lynn paused, trying to find the right words, but an unexpected sound stopped her. It was crying. Matt, he was crying quietly, probably into his pillow. Lynn stood listening, then slowly turned away and walked back down the hall to the guest bedroom. Wednesday morning. Every day it became easier to sit in the office and work, to concentrate on what needed to be done. His thoughts were still carried away into painful distances, but not so often and not for so long. It was obvious to his secretary Bernice that something was wrong, but she guessed that he did not want to talk about it, and did not ask any more, only smiled sympathetically at him. At 10:50 a.m., he got up from his chair, went to his door and closed it. Then he took a dictionary from the bookshelf and put it on the table. He found the word he was looking for and read the definition aloud. A cuckold is a man with an unfaithful wife. He sat back down. "I'm a cuckold." He said it several times. The word seemed strange on his lips. "I'm a cuckold. I was cuckolded. She cuckolded me." He sat for a while, not looking at anything. Then, with a sigh, he put the dictionary aside and went back to work. Saturday day. "For God's sake, Lynn, what the hell did you expect?" Lynn didn't say anything, but her friend Arlene continued. They were sitting in Arlene's kitchen, 2 cups of coffee between them. "You're fucking behind Matt's back with some other guy?" Arlene saw Lynn wince at the word, but continued. "And now you're surprised that he's angry and offended?" "I'm not surprised, Arlene. Does he know how long it's been going on?" Lynn shook her head. "I have no idea. I don't even know how he found out or when. He doesn't want to. We didn't talk about it." "Do you think if you had told him that it was only a few times, would it have made a difference?" "Not for me," Lynn said, making a face. "I mean, if it were the other way around. If he had slept with some other woman, 5 times, 20 times, I would have been torn apart anyway. So don't think I'm surprised." "I'm not surprised, not a bit. I just don't know what to do. I can't get through to him, and I don't know what the hell to do." She looked down, stirring her coffee with a spoon, and Arlene watched her in silence. 3 weeks later, Wednesday afternoon. "No," Matt said firmly. And then, a little more quietly, "No, I don't want her to tell me about it." The therapist frowned slightly. She had short dark hair, almost a beetle haircut, and wore a brown corduroy jumper. Her name was Isabel Harshman. "Don't you think it will help you both? So that you know why Lynn did what she did?" Matt looked at her, not even glancing at his wife sitting next to him. "I think it might help Lynn to get everything out of her soul, but I don't see how it can help me. To be honest, Dr. Harshman, I think I'm suffering enough as it is." Hesitantly, Lynn said, "I thought if I told you about it, about how it happened and why, then you'll realize that I'll never be able to do anything like this again." Matt turned and looked at her. "Do you really believe that? Do you really think there's anything you can tell me that will restore my trust in you, Lynn? So that I feel like I won't have to worry about you for the rest of my life, wondering when the next time you'll jump into bed with another man?" Lynn looked down at her lap. Very quietly, she said, "No, Matt. I don't think there's anything I can say to do that." 2 months later, Thursday evening. "Oh, Matt, it's so beautiful here." She smiled broadly at him, squeezing his hand across the table. They were sitting at a table on the veranda overlooking the Caribbean Sea. The air was delightfully warm, and the red hue of sunset still hung in the sky. On the table between them was a jug of sangria and a plate of fried shrimp. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" His answering smile didn't quite match hers. There was some tension on his face, perhaps around his eyes. He squeezed her hand back for a few moments, then lifted his fork to chop another shrimp. Thank you so much for agreeing to come south with me. Lynn knew it was difficult for him to hold her gaze for more than a moment. An hour later, they were making love in their room. That was wonderful, baby, she murmured in a low, relaxed voice, and Matt reached down. She seemed to have almost fallen asleep, but then she raised her head to look at him and said, "It's not that I don't like it, but it seems like every time we make love lately, you take me from behind." She giggled. "Are you making me your fool?" "What is it?" she asked playfully. Matt looked at her, his brow furrowed slightly. He sighed. "When we do this in a missionary position, He turned away. "I'm watching your face, your expression, and I can't stop seeing you with him. Imagine how you look up at him. The same way." Matt didn't finish the sentence. They lay motionless, and Lynn suddenly felt a chill. A few minutes later, Matt got up, pulled on shorts and a t-shirt, put on sandals, and left the room. 7 weeks later, Saturday night. They worked in silence most of the time, standing in front of the bookshelves on opposite sides of the room. Lynn was sorting out their CDs, and Matt was doing the books. He said, "Should I keep the Dickens novels? I've read them all. Whatever you want, take it if you want. I won't read them." She took out another handful of CDs and put the ones that belonged to Matt on the small stack next to her. Then she turned and looked at him. She watched the muscles of his back move under his t-shirt, how his every move was smooth and precise. It was all so familiar that tears welled up in her eyes. In a low voice, she said, "You know, that's not what I want. I never wanted this." Matt froze for a moment, but didn't turn around. He held back the answer and returned to the books. He didn't need words, they both knew what he would say. 5 weeks later, Sunday evening. "Mommy, Mommy," Beth and Jason shouted, jumping out of Matt's car and running into the house to hug her, and their overnight bags were left abandoned on the ground. They both started talking at once. They told her about the zoo, that giraffes are their favorites. They have such long necks. And that Dad bought each of them cotton candy. Then, having finished with the greetings, they ran past her into the living room and turned on the TV. Matt smiled as he walked towards the house, carrying the bags the children had abandoned. Lynn smiled back. "It looks like you like the zoo." I still couldn't tell if they were thrilled or horrified. We got very close to the giraffes. They towered over the wall, right above our heads. And they also liked the giant turtles. It was a good day. They chatted for another minute or two. Lynn said, "Do you want to come in for a cup of coffee? The coffee pot is on the stove." "No, no, thanks," he said, feeling a little awkward. "I really have to go." "Okay," Lynn said, trying to keep a smile on her face. "See you Wednesday night," he said, and turned back to his car. She stood and watched him go until the Taurus reached the end of the street and turned left out of sight. For months later, Monday evening, Beth was sitting at the kitchen table coloring while Lynn was cooking dinner. Jason was sitting on the floor, and for the 500th time, he was putting together his favorite wooden composite puzzle picture. It was a multicolored clown, and it had 17 parts. "Mommy, do friends have to kiss?" Beth looked at her mother expectantly. Lynn turned to look at her. "I don't know, dear." "What do you mean?" "Well, I never kiss Artie, Melissa, or my school friends." She made a face. "It's so disgusting, kissing Artie. But I met my dad's girlfriend, and they kiss all the time." Jason looked up from the puzzle. "Angela is good," he said. "Yes, she's good. She made us hot dogs. And macaroni and cheese," Jason interrupted. Then he lost interest in the conversation and returned to his puzzle. "Yes, and she also said that next time we can go get ice cream. But she and Dad keep kissing, like you and Dad used to do." "Do friends always kiss?" Lynn squeezed her eyes shut for a moment. Then she opened them and smiled at Beth. "Well, honey, some friends kiss and some don't. It all depends on the circumstances. But kids your age don't kiss their friends, so you don't have to." "Okay," Beth nodded and went back to her coloring book. She turned out to be a duck, although very similar to a stegosaurus. "Dinner," Lynn called. "Go wash your hands." When the children returned to the table, she said, "At least 2 pieces of broccoli each. Otherwise, there will be no dessert today." She watched them spread ketchup on their burgers and start eating them. Then she went back to her bedroom and closed the door. She sat down in an armchair by the bed, put her face in her hands, and began to cry.